In the fall of 2021, something strange happened on my daily commute, and at the time, I didn't realize it would stay with me far longer than the journey itself. Every weekday morning, just after 6:30, I left my flat in Walthamstow, East London, wrapped in a navy coat that never quite blocked the cold. Autumn had settled in early that year. The air smelled damp, a mix of wet leaves and exhaust fumes, and the sky always seemed stuck in that pale gray that makes time feel slower than it really is. I would walk past the closed bakery on Hoe Street, cross the road near the old betting shop, and head down toward Blackhorse Road Station. My routine was fixed, almost mechanical. Tap the Oyster card. Stand on the right side of the escalator. Wait near the third carriage marker on the Victoria Line platform. Headphones in, volume low, just enough to soften the sound of trains screaming through tunnels. I worked as a data analyst for a logistics firm near King's Cross, nothing dramatic, nothing unusual. That's probably why what happened stood out so sharply against the normality of it all. It began on a Tuesday morning in early October, one of those days when the platform felt more crowded than usual, yet quieter at the same time. People stood close together but avoided eye contact, faces half hidden behind masks, eyes tired, unfocused. COVID restrictions had eased, but the habit of distance still clung to everyone. The station lighting flickered slightly, as it often did, casting a yellowish hue that made everyone look older. That was when I noticed him. He stood a few steps away from me, near the tiled wall with the faded emergency instructions. Mid-40s, maybe early 50s. Tall, lean, wearing a dark brown overcoat that looked worn at the cuffs. His hair was graying but neatly combed, and he held a leather briefcase that looked too old to belong to someone commuting in 2021. Not vintage. Just outdated. At first, there was nothing strange about him. London is full of people like that. What caught my attention was the way he kept looking at the digital display board, not impatiently, but as if he expected it to change into something else. His brow was furrowed, his lips pressed together, and every few seconds, he glanced down the tunnel, then back at the board. The train arrived. People shuffled forward. I lost sight of him in the crowd and thought nothing more of it. Until the next morning. Same time. Same platform. Same spot near the third carriage marker. And there he was again, wearing the same coat, holding the same briefcase, standing in the same place by the wall. This time, I noticed more. The briefcase had scratches along the bottom edge, deep ones, like it had been dragged across concrete. His shoes were polished but scuffed at the toes, and his hands trembled slightly when he adjusted his grip. When the train arrived, he didn't move. Everyone else boarded. I hesitated, then stepped inside, turning just in time to see him remain on the platform, watching the doors close with an expression that wasn't frustration, but something closer to recognition, as if he'd seen this exact moment before. On Wednesday, he was there again. By Thursday, I was actively looking for him. The air had grown colder by then, and the station smelled faintly of metal and damp wool. I stood closer than usual, pretending to check my phone while watching him from the corner of my eye. This time, I noticed his lips moving, silently counting, perhaps, or rehearsing something under his breath. When the announcement crackled over the speakers, apologizing for a minor delay, his shoulders stiffened, and he closed his eyes briefly, as if bracing himself. I should have ignored it. London teaches you to mind your own business. But something about the repetition, the precision of it all, unsettled me. On Friday morning, just before 7, the platform was unusually quiet. The train was delayed longer than normal, and the silence stretched. I found myself standing beside him without quite meaning to. Close enough to hear him breathe. Slow. Controlled. Almost deliberate. When he spoke, his voice was low, barely louder than the hum of electricity in the rails. "It's late today," he said. I nodded, unsure why my chest suddenly felt tight. "Seems like it," I replied. He glanced at me then, really looked at me, and for a brief moment, his expression shifted. Not surprise. Something closer to relief. "That's different," he said quietly. Before I could ask what he meant, the train roared into the station, wind rushing past us, paper and dust swirling along the platform. People surged forward again, and I was carried with them, pulled into the carriage before I could think to look back. Through the window, just before the doors slid shut, I saw him standing alone on the platform, staring directly at me now, his face pale under the harsh lights. And for the first time since I'd noticed him, he smiled. Not warmly. Not kindly. But like someone who had just confirmed something important. I spent the rest of that journey staring at my reflection in the darkened window, the rhythm of the train pounding beneath my feet, wondering why my usual commute suddenly felt like the beginning of something I didn't understand yet. And that wasn't the last time I saw him. The following Monday, the sky over East London hung low and heavy, the kind of grey that pressed down on the rooftops and made even familiar streets feel unfamiliar. I woke earlier than usual, just before 5:30, with the strange certainty that I wouldn't be able to fall back asleep. My mind replayed the image of that smile over and over, not menacing exactly, but purposeful, as if I had stepped into a scene already written. By the time I left my flat, the pavements were slick with overnight rain. The streetlights were still on, casting long reflections across the road. I pulled my coat tighter around me and walked faster than usual, my footsteps echoing in the quiet. Every few meters, I caught myself glancing ahead, half expecting to see him standing there, waiting. Blackhorse Road Station was busier than I anticipated. A signal fault somewhere down the line had pushed more people onto earlier trains. The air inside the station felt thick, warm with breath and damp clothing. I tapped in, descended the stairs, and slowed as I approached the platform. He wasn't there. I told myself I felt relieved, but the absence left a hollow space that felt worse than unease. I stood in my usual spot, staring at the tiled wall where he normally leaned. The digital display flickered, announcing a 3-minute wait. Nothing unusual. Nothing strange. The train arrived, and I boarded with everyone else, forcing myself to relax. I spent the day trying to lose myself in spreadsheets and emails, but my concentration drifted. Every time my phone buzzed, my chest tightened. By the time evening came, I felt drained in a way that had nothing to do with work. The next morning, he was back. Tuesday, 6:42 a.m., same platform, same coat, same briefcase. The sight of him sent a jolt through me, sharp and immediate. He noticed me at once. His eyes met mine without hesitation, and he gave a small nod, as though we were colleagues acknowledging each other after a meeting. This time, he stepped closer. "You came earlier yesterday," he said calmly. I frowned. "I don't think so." He tilted his head slightly, studying my face. "You usually arrive at 6:37. Yesterday, it was 6:31. I laughed nervously. "You keep track of people's schedules?" "Only the important ones," he replied, without a hint of humor. The train announcement interrupted us, crackling through the speakers. He glanced up at the board, his jaw tightening. "It's on time," he muttered. "That's a problem." Before I could respond, the train arrived. Again, he didn't board. Again, I was pulled away by the crowd. As the doors closed, I saw him writing something in a small notebook I hadn't noticed before, his pen moving quickly, urgently. That evening, curiosity overcame caution. I stayed on the platform longer than usual, pretending to wait for someone. When the crowd thinned, I walked back toward the wall where he had stood. On the floor, barely visible against the tiles, was a faint chalk marking. A circle, intersected by several lines, smudged as if someone had tried to rub it away. I didn't recognize the symbol, but it unsettled me more than it should have. Over the next 2 weeks, our encounters became frequent, almost scheduled. He spoke more, though never at length. He commented on delays, on weather patterns, on changes so small I would never have noticed them on my own. Each time something deviated from what he expected, he seemed almost distressed. Each time it didn't, he relaxed, shoulders lowering, breath evening out. I learned his name by accident. A young woman bumped into him one morning, spilling coffee down his sleeve. She apologized repeatedly. "It's fine," he said, waving her off. "I'm already late." Again. She hesitated. "Are you sure, sir?" "Daniel," he supplied. "Daniel." The name lingered with me all day. The following Friday, the Victoria line stalled between stations. The lights flickered, then dimmed, plunging the carriage into a low amber glow. People sighed, some groaned. Someone laughed nervously. I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket. No signal. Then I heard his voice. "You're not meant to be here right now." I turned sharply. Daniel stood near the end of the carriage, gripping the overhead rail, his knuckles white. I hadn't seen him board the train. I was certain of it. "What do you mean?" I asked. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. This delay doesn't happen on Fridays. Not like this. Something shifted. The train lurched back into motion before I could respond. The lights brightened. People relaxed. When I looked again, Daniel was gone. I got off at King's Cross, heart pounding, scanning the platform. No sign of him. That night, I barely slept. On Monday morning, he wasn't at Black Horse Road. Nor on Tuesday. By Wednesday, I began to convince myself I'd imagined parts of it, that stress and routine had blurred together into something stranger than reality. Then, on Thursday evening, as I left the office, I found a folded piece of paper tucked beneath my desk phone. Meet me tomorrow. 6:45. Platform end. You deserve to know why you matter. There was no signature. Friday morning arrived colder than the rest, frost clinging to the railings outside my flat. I arrived at the station early, my heart racing. The platform was quiet, the tunnel dark. At the far end, beneath a flickering light, Daniel stood waiting. He looked older somehow. Tired. His briefcase rested open at his feet, filled with notebooks, loose papers, and photographs. As I approached, he straightened, relief washing over his face. "Thank you for coming," he said. "We don't have much time." "Time for what?" I asked. He gestured to the platform, to the rails, to the digital display overhead. "For things to stay the same." The train announcement echoed through the station, louder than usual. Daniel glanced at the board, his expression tightening once more. "Every commute," he said quietly, "is a chance to change something. Most people never notice. But you do." I opened my mouth to ask him what he meant, how he knew so much about my routine, about me. But before I could speak, the lights along the platform flickered violently, plunging us into shadow. And in that brief darkness, I heard footsteps running toward us from the tunnel, fast and deliberate, as if someone else had finally caught up. The footsteps grew louder, echoing off the tiled walls in sharp, uneven bursts. They weren't the hurried steps of someone late for a train. They were measured, confident, closing the distance with intent. My instinct was to move back, but Daniel reached out and caught my sleeve, his grip firm, almost desperate. "Don't run," he said under his breath. "That only makes it worse." The lights flickered back on, one by one, restoring the platform to its dull yellow glow. The tunnel was empty again. No sign of anyone approaching. No shadows slipping away. Just the low hum of electricity and the distant rumble of another train somewhere down the line. I pulled my arm free. "You heard that too, right?" Daniel nodded, already bending to close his briefcase. His hand shook as he snapped the latches shut. "They're getting closer." "That shouldn't be happening yet." "Who is they?" I asked. "And why do you keep talking like this is all scheduled?" He hesitated, eyes scanning the platform, then the stairs, then the CCTV camera mounted above us. "Not here," he said finally. "Too many variables." The digital display chimed, announcing an incoming train. Daniel's shoulders tensed. "Listen to me," he said quickly. "If you want answers, you need to break your routine. Just once. Don't get on this train." I stared at him. "You told me every commute mattered." "And this one matters most," he replied. "Because this is where it starts to repeat." The wind from the approaching train rushed through the tunnel, whipping dust and scraps of paper along the platform. People began to gather around us, oblivious, eyes on their phones, bags slung over shoulders. I felt suddenly exposed, standing there with this strange man and his warnings, feeling like I was teetering on the edge of something I couldn't see. The train screeched into the station. Doors slid open. People boarded. Daniel stepped back, away from the crowd. "Tomorrow," he said. "Same time. Different place. Get off at Highbury and Islington. Take the westbound exit. I'll be waiting." "And if I don't?" I asked. His expression hardened. "Then you'll forget me. Completely. That's how it works." The doors began to close. I hesitated, one foot inside the carriage, one foot still on the platform. Daniel met my eyes, his gaze steady, almost pleading. At the last second, I stepped back. The doors shut. The train pulled away. A few passengers glanced at me with mild irritation, then returned to their screens. Within seconds, I was alone with Daniel. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "You've already changed it," he said quietly. "That's good." I followed him out of the station and into the cold morning air. The streets were busier now, traffic building, the city waking up around us. We walked side by side without speaking, past the bus stops and shuttered shops, until we reached a small cafe tucked between a dry cleaner and a charity shop. The windows were fogged with steam. Inside, it smelled of burnt coffee and warm bread. We sat at a corner table. Daniel chose the seat facing the door. "Start talking," I said. "Properly this time." He wrapped his hands around his mug, though he didn't drink. "In 2019, I worked for Transport for London. Systems analysis. Timetables, delays, passenger flow. Boring work. Until we noticed patterns that shouldn't exist." "What kind of patterns?" "Repeating anomalies," he replied. "Delays that corrected themselves. Trains that arrived early only when certain people were present. Statistical impossibilities, dismissed as data noise. Except they weren't random." He reached into his briefcase and slid a photograph across the table. It showed a grainy image of a Victoria Line platform. Black Horse Road. The timestamp read October, 2021. In the photo, I was standing near the tiled wall, staring at my phone. "I don't remember this," I said. "You wouldn't," Daniel replied. "It's from a version that didn't hold." My throat tightened. "You're saying this has happened before?" He nodded slowly. "Small changes. Minor corrections. Most people never notice when the day resets slightly around them. But some people act as anchors. You're one of them." I pushed the photo back. "That's not possible." "It wasn't," he agreed. "Until it was." He explained how certain routines, repeated daily by millions, created stable points in an otherwise fluid system. Commutes. Habits. Predictable human behavior. When something disrupted those patterns too severely, the system compensated. Adjusted. Smoothed things over. Like a self-correcting loop, I said. "Exactly," Daniel replied. "And you keep causing friction." I laughed, sharp and humorless. "By standing on a platform?" "By noticing," he said. "By hesitating. By stepping back when you're meant to step forward." The cafe door opened. A man in a gray jacket entered, glanced around, then left without ordering. Daniel stiffened. "We don't have long," he said. "They monitor deviations. People who disrupt the flow. Are they human?" I asked. Daniel didn't answer immediately. "They look close enough." Over the next few days, my sense of time began to blur. I took different routes to work. Changed carriages. Altered my schedule by minutes, sometimes seconds. Each change came with a strange sense of resistance, like pushing against a current. I missed calls that hadn't been made. Found emails thanking me for meetings I didn't remember attending. Daniel appeared sporadically. Always when something shifted too far. Once at a bus stop near Finsbury Park. Another time outside a supermarket in Camden, standing between the self-checkouts, pretending to browse. "They're testing boundaries," he told me one evening as we stood under the orange glow of streetlights. "Seeing how much you can bend before you break." "And what happens if I do?" I asked. He looked away. "You disappear from the pattern. Life goes on without noticing the gap." One night, unable to sleep, I searched my own name online. The results were inconsistent. Old social media posts missing. A professional profile showing a different job title. A cached version of a web page listing a phone number I no longer recognized. The next morning, my manager asked if I was feeling all right. "You've already used your annual leave," she said, frowning at her screen. "Twice." I hadn't taken a single day off. The final straw came on a Thursday evening in late November. I arrived home to find my flat door unlocked. Inside, everything looked normal at first. Then I noticed the photos on the shelf. Family pictures I didn't remember taking. A framed image of me standing beside a man I'd never met, his arm around my shoulder. Written on the back, in familiar handwriting, were the words, "You trusted me this time." I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, Daniel called me from a number that didn't exist when I tried to return it. "They're accelerating," he said. "You're running out of safe repetitions." "Then tell me what to do," I said. "Properly. No half answers." There was a pause on the line. I heard static, then the faint sound of a train announcement bleeding through. "Meet me where it started," Daniel said. "Black Horse Road. Tomorrow. But this time, you need to decide whether you want the system to remember you, or erase you cleanly. The line went dead. As I stood at my kitchen window, watching the city move below as if nothing was wrong, I realized something unsettling. The fear I felt wasn't just about what might happen next. It was about the growing sense that, somewhere along the way, a version of me had already made this choice. And I had no idea which one of us was closer to the truth. That night stretched on longer than it should have. Time felt elastic, pulling and thinning in odd places. I lay awake listening to the hum of traffic below my flat, counting buses as they passed, using the rhythm to ground myself. Somewhere between 2 and 3 in the morning, I realized something else had changed. The city sounded wrong. London usually never fully sleeps. Even at its quietest, there's a constant background noise, a low collective breath. But now, there were gaps. Long, hollow pauses where nothing moved, nothing stirred. No sirens. No distant trains. Just silence, heavy and deliberate, as if someone had turned the volume down and forgotten to turn it back up again. I checked my phone. 4:15 a.m. No notifications. No missed calls. No signal. By the time dawn crept in, pale and colorless, I had already decided I was going to Black Horse Road. Not out of bravery, but because doing nothing felt worse. Routine had become a kind of cage, and Daniel had already rattled the door. I left earlier than usual, before the streets fully woke. The air was sharp, biting, carrying the smell of frost and wet concrete. As I walked, I noticed small inconsistencies. A shop sign spelled differently than I remembered. A parked car I was certain belonged to my neighbor, now bearing a different license plate. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to make me question myself. The station entrance loomed ahead, its glass reflecting the gray sky. Inside, the ticket barriers stood open. No staff. No commuters. The electronic gates displayed a static green arrow, frozen mid-animation. My footsteps echoed as I descended to the platform. Daniel was already there. He stood exactly where I first noticed him weeks ago, near the faded emergency instructions. Same coat. Same briefcase. But his face looked drawn, as if he hadn't slept in days. Dark circles clung beneath his eyes, and when he saw me, his relief was immediate, almost painful to watch. "You came," he said. "I said I would," I replied. "You said I needed to decide." He nodded. "Yes. And I need you to understand what you're deciding between." The platform lights flickered, then steadied. Somewhere in the tunnel, a train moved, slow and distant, like something breathing in its sleep. Daniel opened his briefcase and removed a thick folder, its edges worn, corners bent. He handed it to me. "Those are you," he said. Inside were documents. Reports. Photographs. Commuter CCTV stills. Each page showed a different version of my mornings. Different coats. Different bags. Sometimes I stood closer to the edge of the platform. Sometimes farther back. In one photo, Daniel wasn't there at all. "How many times?" I asked. "Enough," he replied quietly. He explained that the system didn't reset everything. It nudged. Corrected. Redirected. When something went too far off course, it rewound small sections of reality to stabilize the whole. Most people were flexible enough not to notice. Their memories adjusted. Their lives bent smoothly into place. But anchors don't bend easily, Daniel said. We hold shape. That's why they notice us. Us? I asked. He hesitated. I wasn't always like this. I used to be normal. Married. 2 kids. I took the same train every day from Tottenham Hale. Same carriage. Same seat. I liked knowing exactly where I'd be at 6:48 every morning. I already knew what he was going to say before he said it. One day, I stayed on the platform. I swallowed. Like I did. Yes, he said. The first time, nothing happened. The second time, things started slipping. By the 5th, I was no longer supposed to exist in any version that held. A train announcement echoed faintly through the station, distorted, stretched. The digital display flickered, letters scrambling before settling again. You're still here, I said. Barely, Daniel replied. I exist between corrections. I get dragged forward when the system needs me, pushed aside when it doesn't. I remember everything. That's the punishment. I closed the folder, hands trembling. And what happens to me? Daniel looked down the tunnel. You're approaching a convergence point. Too many deviations stacked too close together. The system won't keep adjusting gently. It'll make a clean choice. What kind of choice? Either you become invisible to it, he said. Like me. Or it locks you into a fixed version. No more hesitation. No more awareness. Just routine, forever. The sound of footsteps echoed behind us. We both turned. A man stood at the far end of the platform, perfectly still. Mid-30s. Gray jacket. Neutral face. He held nothing. Carried no bag. He looked like someone you'd forget moments after seeing. Daniel stiffened. Don't engage, he whispered. The man took a step forward. Then another. With each step, the air seemed to tighten. The lights dimmed slightly. My ears rang, a high-pitched tone that made my teeth ache. What happens if I talk to him? I asked. Daniel's voice was barely audible. They correct harder. The man stopped a few meters away. He smiled politely. You're early, he said to me, as if we were colleagues meeting for coffee. That's becoming a pattern. I felt something shift inside my chest, like a weight sliding out of place. Who are you? He tilted his head. Maintenance. Daniel let out a short, bitter laugh. That's a new one. The man ignored him. His eyes never left mine. You're causing instability. Your awareness is increasing faster than expected. I didn't ask for this, I said. No, he agreed. But you responded to it. The platform lights flickered violently. The digital display began cycling through arrival times that made no sense. Trains listed for destinations that didn't exist. Daniel stepped between us. You don't need him yet. The man's smile faded slightly. Correction window is closing. I felt dizzy. Memories surfaced that didn't belong to this version of me. Standing on the platform, stepping forward, stepping back. Saying yes. Saying no. Each choice branching, folding, overlapping. Tell me the truth, I said to Daniel. If I choose to forget, does it stop? Daniel's jaw tightened. For you. Yes. And if I don't? Then you learn how deep it goes, he replied. And you never stop noticing. The man took another step closer. I realized then that the fear wasn't the worst part. It was the temptation. The idea of surrendering, of letting the system smooth me back into something comfortable and unquestioning. No more doubt. No more fractures in reality. Just mornings that flowed exactly as expected. The tunnel filled with light. A train was approaching fast, far faster than it should have. Wind rushed past us, pulling at my coat, my hair, the papers spilling from Daniel's briefcase and scattering across the platform like leaves. The man raised his hand slightly, as if signaling. Daniel shouted something I couldn't hear. And in that moment, standing at the edge of the platform with the ground trembling beneath my feet, I understood something with sudden clarity. The system wasn't afraid of me because I disrupted it. It was afraid because I was starting to choose. And whatever choice I made next wouldn't just affect this morning, or this platform, or even this version of myself. It would determine whether I remained part of the pattern at all, or stepped far enough outside it that nothing could ever fully pull me back again. The train tore through the tunnel like something unleashed, its headlights too bright, too white, washing the platform in a harsh glare that erased shadows instead of casting them. The wind roared, flattening my coat against my back, rattling the metal bench, lifting the loose papers into the air where they spun wildly before slapping back against the tiles. The man in the gray jacket didn't move. He stood perfectly balanced, untouched by the turbulence, as if the rushing air simply curved around him. His raised hand remained steady, fingers relaxed, almost casual. Daniel, on the other hand, staggered back a step, bracing himself against the wall. Don't, Daniel shouted, his voice finally cutting through the noise. If you board that train, they lock you in. That version becomes permanent. The train screeched as it slowed, metal screaming against metal. Sparks flashed along the rails. The digital display above us glitched violently, letters dissolving into blocks of light before reassembling into nonsense. Service terminated. Service resumed. On time. Cancelled. All at once. The doors slid open. Inside the carriage, everything looked wrong. The lighting was too bright, the seats too clean, the passengers sitting too still. They faced forward, hands folded, eyes unfocused, as if frozen mid-thought. None of them reacted to the open doors. None of them looked up. The man finally spoke again. His voice was calm, reassuring, the tone of someone explaining a simple procedure. "Step inside," he said. "This resolves cleanly. Your awareness will stabilize. Your memories will align. You'll return to routine with no residual effects." "And Daniel?" I asked, my voice barely audible. The man glanced at him briefly, like an item on a checklist. "He will be handled." Daniel laughed, sharp and hollow. "That's what you said last time." The man's eyes flicked back to me. "You see? He's unstable. Prolonged exposure does that." I looked at Daniel. His face was pale, jaw clenched, but his eyes were clear. "You said there were two options," I said. "You never told me how to choose the third." Daniel froze. "What third?" the man asked. Daniel slowly straightened. "You never told him," he said, "not to me, but to the man. Which means you're scared he'll find it on his own." The man's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air, subtle and heavy, like pressure building before a storm. "There is no third option," he said flatly. Daniel met my eyes. "They can erase you. Or they can exile you. But they can't stop you from doing what anchors do best." "And what's that?" I asked. Daniel's lips twitched, just slightly. "Holding things in place." The train's doors remained open, waiting. Daniel stepped closer to me, lowering his voice. "You don't have to board. You don't have to run. You just have to stay." "Stay where?" I asked. "Right here," he replied. "At the point of correction." The man shook his head slowly. "That's not sustainable." "No," Daniel agreed. "It's disruptive." The platform trembled beneath our feet. Tiles cracked along the edge, hairline fractures spreading like spiderwebs. The lights flickered again, then dimmed. I felt it then, a pull, not toward the train, but toward the space itself. The platform. The rails. The exact moment between arrival and departure. Between decision and consequence. Memories surged, not in sequence, but layered. Versions of me stepping forward. Versions stepping back. Versions standing still while the world adjusted around them. In every one, the platform remained. The constant. The anchor point. I understood. "You don't correct places," I said slowly. "You correct people." The man's smile vanished. "And places don't forget," I continued. "They remember everything that passes through them." Daniel's eyes widened. The air grew heavy, almost viscous, as if the space itself were resisting movement. The train's interior lights flickered. A few passengers twitched, hands tightening, heads tilting slightly, like mannequins briefly animated by faulty wires. "You're exceeding permitted awareness," the man said, his voice strained now. "Step back." I didn't. Instead, I took one deliberate step toward the edge of the platform, not to board, not to jump, but to stand exactly where countless versions of me had hesitated before. I placed my foot where the tile was most worn, smoothed by years of waiting. The station groaned. Somewhere deep in the tunnel, something shifted, like a massive structure settling into a new position. The light stabilized. The digital display froze, then went dark entirely. For the first time since I'd met him, the man in the gray jacket looked uncertain. "This location isn't authorized for persistence," he said. Daniel let out a breathless laugh. "Neither am I. Yet here we are." The train doors began to close on their own, slowly, reluctantly, as if pulled by an unseen force. The man turned sharply toward the carriage, raising his hand again, but this time, nothing happened. "No," he said quietly. "That's not." The doors slammed shut. The train pulled away, lights dimming as it disappeared into the tunnel, leaving behind a sudden, profound silence. The platform light steadied. The air loosened. The pressure in my chest eased, though the tension remained, coiled and watchful. The man stood very still. "This isn't finished," he said finally. "You can't remain here forever." "I don't need forever," I replied. "Just long enough." "Enough for what?" he asked. I looked at Daniel. He was staring at the tunnel, awe and fear battling across his face. "Enough," I said slowly, "to see what happens when the system has to work around me instead of through me." The man studied me for a long moment, then nodded once, as if logging a result. "Temporary deviation acknowledged," he said. "We will adapt." He turned and walked toward the stairs, his footsteps echoing until they faded into nothing. When he was gone, Daniel finally exhaled fully, leaning against the wall as if his legs could no longer support him. "You just did something very dangerous," he said. "I know," I replied. "And very rare." The station announcement crackled to life overhead, distorted but understandable. "This is a service update. Trains may be delayed due to unforeseen circumstances." Daniel laughed quietly. "That's one way to put it." I looked down the tunnel, where the darkness now felt less threatening, more observant. "What happens now?" I asked. Daniel straightened slowly, meeting my gaze. "Now," he said, "you learn how many places like this exist. And how many people are standing on them without realizing they're holding the world together." As commuters began to filter onto the platform, unaware of what had just shifted beneath their feet, I felt something settle into place inside me. Not certainty. Not peace. But purpose. And somewhere, deep within the system, something had started watching me not as a problem to be corrected, but as a variable it no longer fully controlled. The commuters arrived in steady waves, footsteps and murmurs filling the space where silence had ruled moments before. Phones came out. Bags were adjusted. No one noticed the cracked tiles near the platform edge, or the faint chalk-like markings now half buried beneath countless shoes. To them, it was just another delayed morning. But it wasn't to me. Daniel stood beside me, watching the crowd with an expression I couldn't quite name. Relief, perhaps. Or grief. Or the exhaustion of someone who had carried too much awareness for too long. "You won't be able to stay here like this," he said quietly. "Not every day." "I know," I replied. "But I don't need to." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "You've stabilized the point. That gives you something I never had." "What's that?" "A way back," he said. "On your terms." The next train arrived normally. No flickering lights. No impossible silence. Just the familiar rush of wind and metal. This time, when the doors opened, the carriage looked ordinary. People blinked, shifted, complained softly about the delay. I boarded. Daniel didn't. He remained on the platform, standing where the worn tile met the edge, exactly where I had stood moments before. As the doors closed, our eyes met through the glass. "For what it's worth," he said, his voice carrying just enough to reach me, "you chose better than I did." The train pulled away. The days that followed were quieter. Not simpler, but steadier. The inconsistencies didn't vanish, but they softened. I still noticed things, small deviations, moments where reality hesitated, then continued. But now, I understood them. I adjusted without panicking. I learned when to step forward, and when to stay still. Daniel appeared less often. Sometimes weeks passed without seeing him at all. When he did surface, it was brief. A nod across a platform. A reflection in a dark window that vanished when I looked twice. He was becoming part of the infrastructure, in his own way. As for the man in the gray jacket, I never saw him again. But occasionally, I sensed observation. Not hostile. Cautious. As if the system had rewritten its rules just enough to accommodate me. By winter, my commute had changed. Not the route. Not the time. Just the way I stood on the platform. I no longer waited passively. I paid attention to the ground beneath my feet, the rhythm of arrivals and departures, the invisible balance held together by routine and choice. I understood now that cities aren't just built of steel and concrete, but of moments repeated until they become foundations. Some people pass through those moments without leaving a mark. Others, without ever realizing it, become the reason everything else holds. On certain mornings, when the air is cold and the platform unusually still, I feel it again. That pull. That quiet pressure of possibility. And I know that somewhere, beneath the noise and schedules, the system is adjusting around me. Not because it wants to, but because it has learned that I will notice if it doesn't. And I will choose.